and welcome. My name is Jake Rayson. I am a forest gardener and forest garden designer. I live in West Wales, and every Wednesday I'm doing a forest garden workshop online, live streaming workshop on the Twitch channel, which is what you'll be watching this on now, unless you're watching the recording, in which case that'll be posted up on YouTube. So for today, I'm going to be talking about forest garden design, and yeah, so I'll just get on with it. Do give us a wave in the chat. Now I've got the chat window set up on Twitch, so give us a shout, a wave or something, just so I know I'm not talking to empty space. I'm not terribly sure how to use it. I can use the chat, but I'm not terribly sure how many people are viewing. I think I've got a number there. It says 21, but then I've got another number that says 0. So who knows? Okay. Quickly then, design. In the previous life, I was a web designer, a web builder, web designer, front end developer. Call it what you will. So I've been doing design for a long time. Basically, it's deciding where to put things. Not to make it too fancy. And for most people, if you're doing it for yourself, this is really what it is about: is deciding where to put stuff, put trees, put plants, put vegetables, polytunnels, watering points, that kind of stuff. That is essentially what the design aspect is about. Design is not making things look nice. That's part of it, but that's not what it is. So garden design, I'd say 80% of garden design is not how it looks. It's how it works, because really we're talking about designing a space for people. It has traditionally been quite human-centered design, but increasingly now I think we need to start thinking about designing for other life forms other than Homo sapiens. Okay, a bit about myself. I'm on Twitter, sometimes despairing at the world, and my website is forestgarden.wales, and these slides will be up in some shape or form, always at that URL. So forestgarden.wales/talks/design. If you press the P key, you will get slides, notes for the slides. So there will be like extra information in the right hand side, lots of links and things like that. So that's always worth bearing in mind. Press P to see the notes. Press P, come back. Okay, so today then, let's get cracking. There's an awful lot to cover actually, and because I don't know if any of the people here, am I recording as well? So I'm just going to check if I'm recording, because the people who I don't know if the people who are watching know anything about forest gardening. Every session I will be going through what a forest garden is and the kind of defining characteristics of a forest garden and why it's so cool. So oopsie, let's do that then. Lovely. Yeah, chat. Wave, gonna wave now. So oops. So first of all, I'm going to talk about what is a forest garden, and then I'll talk about design in general terms, but really kind of sustainable design, which is what forest gardens are about. That's at the core of forest gardening, and how you design sustainably, and the ideas behind that. There's an awful lot there. I won't have time to go through all of it, but I'll give you an overview. The design principles, 3 kind of overarching principles that I find useful when approaching where to put things in the garden, and then kind of specific principles as well, like kind of very more targeted stuff, and then I will zoom through the design process, which is looking at a make-believe garden, and how a kind of simplified version of how I go around designing a forest garden. I mean, I design forest gardens for a living. Well, I kind of used to, might have to be furloughing myself, but the yeah, doing it professionally, it's the same process really for everyone. You've got to kind of gather the information, gather the elements, put them together, and then work out where to put stuff based on all this information. So I will just go through the kind of a quick overview of that as well, a quick overview of the design process. So yes, let's get cracking with a forest garden definition. So I always like to start off by kind of comparing a forest garden to an orchard. This is like a really useful way of describing what it is and how it functions, because everyone can kind of picture what an orchard is, like rows of fruit trees, and it's a self-sustaining orchard, which means that it supplies its own nutrients and its own protection. So you have windbreaks, and you have plants like comfrey to provide nutrients, and it's concentrated on wildlife as well. You're actually welcoming wildlife in, because what you're after is a balanced ecosystem to act as pest control. Integrated pest control, I think, is the technical term. And it's underplanted with edible shrubs and perennial vegetables. So rather than as in the photograph, as in the image you can see, there's grass underneath. In a forest garden, you're using a ground cover that requires far less maintenance. So you don't need to have sheep, and you don't have to have tree guards. You have a permanent ground cover with edible shrubs and perennial vegetables growing in that ground cover. So that's, for me, kind of sums up the idea of what it is. There are three characteristics of a forest garden. It's productive, so it has a whole range of produce that you grow. So not just food, but also herbs, woods, canes, dyes, and it's multi-layered as well. So it's kind of productive in a sense of you're using all the available space, not just one layer. You're using all the space, and that's over time as well. So it's throughout the year. It's sustainable. Oh, that's a photograph, by the way, of some catkins in the forest garden. It's sustainable, which means that really the key idea about this is that you don't have to bring anything else into the forest garden. It provides everything in the garden itself. Now, it's kind of self-supporting. This doesn't mean that it's isolated. Like an awful lot of other gardens are kind of quite, well, people like to think of them as isolated and don't kind of account for where they sit in the landscape. Whereas a forest garden, you're actually encouraging wildlife to come in, because you want pest control, such as frogs or wasps or toads, hoverflies, or things like that, birds, and you want to encourage them in from the landscape. But it's self-sustaining in that you don't have to bring. There's no human. You're not bringing anything in. Humans aren't bringing stuff in. You're not bringing in fertilizers. You're not bringing in pesticides. And you really need, on this note, you really need to think about growing native plants where possible, because you want to support wildlife. It's an integral part of a forest garden. It's also low maintenance, and this is a kind of offshoot of this. It's not the kind of key design idea behind a forest garden, but it really is low maintenance. There's minimal weeding, no watering. You're not digging anything up. You're not creating compost and fertilizers. You're like in the image here. You're using chop and drop mulching, for example, where you're chopping, and in this example it's comfrey, and you're laying it around the base of the fruit tree. It's really low maintenance. That's it. You're not making compost. Now, this isn't to say you can't make compost. I mean, as a family, we're in transition between growing annual vegetables and growing perennial vegetables, and kind of relying upon the forest garden for food. So it is a process, and it is kind of tricky finding out what a plant is and how do you eat it. So yeah, you can have annual vegetables and perennial vegetables side by side. It's not kind of purist school of gardening thought. But for the actual forest garden itself, you're not making compost. You're not making fertilizers. You're not making comfrey tea or anything. Okay, and yeah, really at this point, I think it's worth. I think it's really worth pointing out the reasons why I've gotten into forest gardening is because of the climate emergency and the ecological emergency. And forest gardening really addresses those at a local level, that you're growing food and produce for yourselves, but with nature. And hopefully it's opening up people to the idea of engaging not only with their landscape, but engaging with their politics with a lowercase p, that you're getting people out engaged in a wider landscape, in a wider political landscape and economic landscape, but also the wider the place where you live, and becoming involved. So yeah, for me that's kind of really, really critical. It's has a real purpose to it. Forest gardening really is about, it's not about making things look pretty. I mean, it can be, but it's about growing food, but it's also about caring for the environment and then expressing that in other ways. So I've got 5 guidelines which I've squished down into one place, and I always think these are really, really, for me, these are the really, really core kind of things to think about when you're creating a forest garden. And it doesn't end, it's you're always thinking about these guidelines. You're always thinking about these things. It's not like, oh, I've finished a forest garden. You've never finished a forest garden. You've never finished a garden. It's always a work in progress, like humans. So these are the 5 things. Windbreak, absolutely. Protection, first of all. So protecting your plants. Ideally, you want to be using windbreaks on all sides of the forest garden. Taller ones at the back, at the north side, and shorter plants at the shorter windbreak on the south side. And that's because you want to balance the amount of sun that you get, but also cut down the amount of wind that you get. I have a previous workshop on this, which I think is up on YouTube, and I've got links here as well to the different pages, which link off of here. So windbreak, you establish a windbreak, but in the meantime, you can grow a nurse tree which provides protection for young plants. In this example is broom, but you can use a variety of nurse trees. They're kind of temporary protection for a tree that you've planted. So you put like 2 or 3 of them about a couple of meters away from the tree that you've planted, until such time the windbreaks that you've planted have established themselves. Or you can create a dead hedge, which is a very simple use of brash, which are old branches. And you can see from the image that it's really, really easy to make, and that just provides an extra bit of protection. And I wish I had done this when we first started growing the forest garden here, because we've had quite a lot of damage from the wind for blossom, and also for trees. We've lost a few trees actually because of it. Spacing is critical. Getting the spacing right between the trees that you're planting. Make sure you know how big the plants are that you're planting, how big they're going to grow, how tall, and the diameter, and leave enough space between them. And the rule of thumb is 1/4 to 1/2 of the average canopy diameter, and that allows enough space to fall on the plants below. Otherwise, if you have a closed canopy, you're not going to get any light through. Layers, using all available layers, as I mentioned before. There are 7 layers to a forest garden. I can only remember, I don't know, a few of them. But yeah, there's a link to an article there that you can find out more information. But yeah, you're using all the available space. And ground cover. This is such an easy thing to do, and it's so useful. It really, really is. This example here, we've got ground ivy growing as a ground cover. Glaucoma heteracea. It grows really well here. It tends to like a bit more shady and damp conditions. but once you've planted it, it just cuts down on the amount of weeding. So you should never ever see any bare earth in a forest garden. And it gives me the heebie-jeebies when you look at Gardener's World and there's these big patches of bare earth and they're kind of pulling out plants and putting plants in. But it's like my immediate reaction is to plant a ground cover and nutrients. In the this book, oh crikey, I've always got my trusty Martin Crawford's Creating a Forest Garden book. There's a very good chapter about creating a nutrient budget, how many nutrient plants you need to kind of grow in your forest garden. But if you haven't got this book and you're growing a forest garden, get this book. It's really, really good. Really recommend it. Very good reference. Well, just one other thing actually. Yeah, along those lines, is if you can. Oh, PFAF. Plants for a Future is a really, really good database of plants. So it's just fantastic amount of information there, and they have a whole page. They have a whole set of pages about ground cover plants and windbreak plants. So fantastic reference as well. Okay, on to design. So we've got kind of definition of the forest garden sorted out, I think, and on to the design of it. Right, so design, as I said before, design really it's about deciding where to put things. The elements in a forest garden, everything from the paths to the watering spots, to the taps, to the if you've got compost beds or annual beds, you've got a polytunnel, propagation shed, trees, shrubs. Everything is like, where do you put things? And it's juggling all these different elements together. It's deciding where to put them, where's the best place for them. And it's kind of focused around the person. You start off with the people who are using the space. Design really is about how the space is used, not how the space looks, but how you want to portray yourself. It's how will you use the space, what people are using it, and also what wildlife will be using it as well. So, for example, always start off with who is using the space. Is it a family garden? Do you need some lawn for children to kick a football around on? It's not that. Again, it's like, you don't have to be a forest garden purist. You can just take elements and apply them to different parts of the garden, but really concentrate on like the people, get people out in the garden and using the space. That's what you need to concentrate on when you're designing it, and then the plants and how it looks will follow from that. And it's really about trying different things out. The kind of design process, you can do it on a piece of paper or you can do it on a CAD plan, but it's you can do it on a piece of paper, like a paper plan, and move and sketch stuff or cut things out and move them around on the plan, or you can use a CAD plan, a computer-aided design plan, which is what the image is from. Doesn't matter. The important thing is to try out different ideas, and you can try it outside in your garden, in your space as well. So it's about trying out different things, and the idea of moving elements around on the page is that you're making mistakes. You're saying, will that work? Will that compost bin work there? Is there enough light to put an annual vegetable bed here? Is there enough light for this fruit tree here? How tall does that windbreak need to be? You try out these different things in different places, and you make mistakes. But the key thing is that you are making mistakes before you build or plant anything. Yep. So you're thinking through, but before you go out and put a tree in. There are some people, I've kind of heard people say, I just throw a whole load of trees in, plant a whole load of trees, see which ones survive, and then cut back the ones I don't want. And you're going, well, yeah, but I don't know, if you're spending £25 or say £25 on a fruit tree, I don't really want to be planting a dozen of them when I know that I only need three of them to grow, and then cutting them down. So it's a bit, I don't think that kind of works. Really depends on the space that you have, and depends on the plants that you want to grow. But for a garden, doesn't really work for me. And the critical thing is to make the big mistakes early. So put the stuff where you think it's going to go, and go, oh no, that's a terrible, terrible place to put those massive, great big trees, because that will shade out all the light from the house. So, but you make the big mistakes early, and you make the mistakes in the design. You don't make the mistakes out in the garden. Yeah. And the only thing about professionals who are design professionals is that they just happen to make mistakes quicker and then to rectify them, or they've made the mistakes before and know not to make those mistakes again. But it's a process for everybody. You're going to go through, try it out. Does it work? Yep. It's not just a one-off thing that you do. And at the centre of this is working with nature. This is the subtitle to Martin Crawford's book, Working with Nature to Grow Edible Crops. And that really is, it's at the sustainable core of forest gardening. The whole idea is you're working with nature. Couldn't really sum it up any better. And using, this is more from my kind of reading. There's another book by a chap called Benjamin Vogt called New Garden Ethic. I'm hoping you can see that. Fantastic book. It's about North American prairie gardens and prairies, but really, really good, because it actually gets you thinking about using native plants. And in a forest garden, there are a lot of non-native plants, but use native plants where you can, because it's not just about pollinators. It's also about providing food as a host plant for the larval stages of insects. And without insects, you won't have birds. And without insects, you won't have mammals or amphibians or anything else. So plant natives where possible. And finally, in the design, it's you're trying to engage people. It's this idea of, by gardening, by creating a forest garden, it's a stepping stone to the wider landscape, quite like physically and metaphorically as well. That you want to get engagement, political engagement, environmental engagement, because we are kind of, I know we're in a time of crisis with regard to the coronavirus, but it was also, we are still in a ecological and climate emergency. It is a proper crisis, and the more people who are engaging, then we can do something about it. But it requires everybody to do something. It's not can't leave it to individuals. Political rant over. So just want to kind of go through again the idea. Design is a process. A forest garden is a process. A garden is a process. That it's not just a one-stop thing that you do. This is an illustration from my web design days. Design, build, evaluate. We could say design, plant. I can't remember what the other one was. But move things around. You start off with a design. Try it out. You build it. Well, try it out try out the design first of all, on paper or on the plan, and then you go out into the garden. You plant the plants. You build the things, and then you see what you take stock, and then you refine it. And it's a spiral, and you're kind of improving, constantly improving. And the interesting thing about the design process is that it is, like everything, infinite, in that you can always improve things. Yeah, and you can home in onto the specific detail. But if you really want to start off, make with the big things, get the big things right, which is the sustainable aspect of it. And then the benefits of designing. Why bother designing? There's a really nice chap who lives up the road who has started I think it was a kind of like a woodland or a forest garden, and he just had a whole load of volunteers come around, and everyone planted trees in the ground, and it was a great day. And he was like, but they're all the trees are in the wrong place because they're going to overshadow each other, and he didn't want that one there, and it's actually more work. So the benefit of design is that it's easier to move symbols than it is to move things. Yes, you can go out, plant everything, rip everything out, plant everything again. But if you move things around on a piece of paper, this is a friend's forest garden plan that he's done. it's easy to move those symbols around, those bits of paper or the circle in a CAD package than it is to go out and do it in the garden. It's also a fantastic place to document observations as well. This is an app called Sun Surveyor, which is a really, really good app. Really recommend it. You use it to see where the sun is in the sky. Now, I know that most of you will say, well, it's pretty obvious where the sun is in the sky, but it changes different times of day, and it also changes different times of year as well. So it's higher in the summer and lower in the winter, and you can kind of estimate how much sunlight a specific area will get, and you can put that information onto your plan. So you can say this is south at the bottom of the plan here, and this is north, and this is where the light's coming from, and you can kind of work out where the shade is and where the prevailing wind is, and whole other things as well. So it's a good place to put your observations down, and then you can combine your wish list. I always say to people who want a forest garden, they'll say, well, what plants should I grow? And it is a tricky one because there's a lot of exotic plants that people don't really know, and I don't know how to grow them. I don't know how to eat them or use them. So there is a kind of trial and error, but try and make a wish list of the things that you want. And if you know you hate blackcurrants, don't plant blackcurrants. If you know you like, I don't know, hazelnuts, then plant hazels. But make a list of it. Make a list of the stuff that you want, and then try and work out what's most important to you and what things aren't so important, and you kind of prioritize the list, and then you can incorporate that list into the design. So you can say, okay, on this picture here, there's this CAD plan, but I've got a what is that? Oh, it's a hazel. I've got a hazel and a crab apple, and you can move them around. Now you know you want a hazel, you know you want a crab apple, and you can move them around on the design. So design enables you to do that, to play with different ideas. And then once you've done that, you can say, right, you know what you want, you know where you want it, let's just work out another list. You can see I like lists. What the work that needs to be done and the order it needs to be done in, and that gives you a sense of focus, and that gives you it makes it much easier to kind of visualize what the end result will be, but also the process of it. It makes it easier to break the work up into smaller parts and give you a sense of progress for that. So those are the benefits of design. Principles of design. Now, attention. This is, like, for me, really is kind of critical. This is the raised bed. They don't look like this anymore. A couple of years ago, I grew a load of calendula, marigold, and they just kind of took over. And I thought, oh, they're nice. They're nice flowers, but they just kind of took over a little bit, and they provided a home for slugs, and then the slugs took over and they ate everything. So you need to kind of pay attention to areas, and like when you're weeding stuff, you're not weeding it to get rid of the weeds, you're weeding it most of the time to get rid of the habitat for the slugs. This is like with annual vegetables. You design outwards, so start off with a house and the kitchen, and then work out from there the different areas. So you can have the crops that are most important, like the daily crops closer to the kitchen, and the more like annual crops kind of further away, or the crops that you want to keep an eye on, like cherries and hazelnuts, you have them closer so that they're kind of closer to the house. Yeah, but you design outwards from the house. In permaculture terms, this is called zoning, I think. You have like the individual and then the house, the area that's used most, and you kind of break it down into different areas, different zones. And protection, I mentioned this before, but protection really is protecting your crops from wind, from slug damage, from pest damage, but particularly at the stage when things are getting established. I kind of say for perennial vegetables, always treat perennials like annual vegetables until they're established. For example, growing Turkish rocket, I've tried to grow it for like 3 years, and every year I get a few leaves, and I can't even remember what it tastes like. So last year I planted it out in the raised bed and kept it weeded, and they've done fantastically well. There's about a clump of about four or five Turkish rocket plants, and I'm going to transplant them into the perennial veg area later on in a month or so's time. So yeah, protect your plants. And accessibility. Signposting, like raised beds are they serve a function. Raised beds aren't for plants. Raised beds are for people. So you're creating a space that people can recognize and can register, and it's easy. And I've actually put big signs up. These signs were for a talk that I did, but they're actually really, really useful. So you can say to somebody, go and get me some spinach. Where's the spinach? There's a big sign that says spinach, and it might be Good King Henry or it might be chard, but you get the idea. It's a spinach type plants. And the other thing as well is the width of the paths and the width of the beds. You want to be able to reach across. So the width of a raised bed, these beds are 1.5 meters wide. And I kind of realised actually that's too wide, because I actually have to get onto the bed to access it. I don't even want to be bothered with that. So make your beds 1.2 meters wide, and put paths in as well, so you can actually access different parts of the garden. If you don't access a part of a garden, then you won't kind of weed it, and you won't be able to keep on top of it or harvest it. You'll miss the harvest. So accessibility is really, really important. And another side of that as well is the accessibility to information. So that is critical too. The kind of knowledge that you have. Starting off, I think to start off with Martin Crawford's book, and there's a Forest Garden UK Facebook group, and there is a couple of suppliers of perennial vegetables, Incredible Vegetables, Mandy Barber, and Backyard Larder, Alison Tyndale. So it's having access to that information and access to that knowledge about how to grow things and how to eat them, where to plant them. Okay, and then I've got my list of 6 specific principles. And again, this is bearing in mind across the design process that you're thinking about the kind of broad ideas about accessibility and protection, but in general terms. But like these are kind of more specific things. But this is throughout the process of kind of creating a forest garden. They're always kind of bearing these things in mind. So firstly, it's useful to someone. Where am I going to go with this? Oh, there it is. So you're planting plants. This is a dwarf comfrey Symphytum ibericum. You're planting plants that are useful to wildlife and useful to humans and for the soil. So you're kind of building up the soil, or you're increasing soil fertility, or you're providing a host plant for larval stage of a butterfly, or it's protection for the nest of a bird, or it's providing a fruit to be harvested by birds and people. So you get the idea. Your garden, it's useful. It has a purpose for somebody, for some creature in the garden, or for other plants as well. Native plants, as I said before, always use native plants where possible, because they have co-evolved. Native plants have co-evolved with the wildlife in your garden, so they actually are better at providing. They're better at providing what the wildlife requires. Now, there is some argument about pollinators, and that there are some non-native plants that extend the season for pollinators, but that's a bit, it's true. But then our wildlife survived without non-natives for millennia, so I don't really know how much that is important. And then bear in mind the aspect as well. The aspect of your garden, which way does it point in terms of the points of the compass, and where is the sun coming from, and what's the orientation of the land. What type of soil do you have? Its pH, its structure. Is it clay? Is it loam? Is it sandy? Is it acid? Is it alkaline? Then the structure of the garden itself, like what are the existing fences, outbuildings, trees, how does it sit in the landscape, what other things have you got around, what are the waterways, so all these other things to kind of consider. And know your plants. This is like an ongoing process. There's RHS Plant Finder is a really good resource. There is a native filter on the RHS Plant Finder as well, which is good to know. And know your plants, because you want to get the right plant in the right place. If a plant is happy, then it then it will grow. Most plants want to grow. Give it a helping hand by putting it where it wants to grow. Look at where it grows in the wild, and give it the right amount of the right conditions, and also consider how big the plant will get. This is a whole spacing thing, and this applies to trees, but also applies to shrubs and to herbaceous perennials as well. So, yeah, for example, it's wild garlic, Allium ursinum. It is kind of rampant ramsons. They will take over a space if they like the conditions. They will just go whoomp, and they will just, in the spring, everything will come up. There'll be ramsons everywhere. So yeah, make sure that you've got them in the right space, but that you can contain them if they are going to go on the rampage. Okay, so a quick swig of tea. Any questions so far? It does feel like I am talking into the void. How are we doing for time? No. Okay. Design process 33. That's good. I don't know, how can I tell? Right then, mod actions, auto mod queue, player, live activity feed. No idea what that means. Lovely job, 43. Let's get moving then with the design process. So, there are four parts that I've kind of made up, really, but just to help break it down a little bit about the design process. The first thing is creating an outline plan. I won't go into this here. This is a kind of the planning stage, where you are either using a satellite photograph to make a plan and importing that into CAD, or you're printing out a satellite photograph and tracing it, or you're using an ordnance survey map and then using it on paper, or two different ways you can do it. You can either do it on paper, or you can do it on a CAD program. So that's kind of creating an outline plan of the space, and then you add your survey observations, and all that means is you look at the different aspects, different parts of the site, and add those observations, what you see, to the plan. So sewage pipes, big sycamore in the corner of the garden, concrete slabs from an old patio, that kind of stuff. You write all that down on your plan. Write that down, a list of stuff, and then you make a note on your plan where that stuff is. And then make a wish list of things that you want. Some greenhouse, polytunnel, sun lounging area, lawn for the kids to kick a football, what plants you would like, what kind of crop you would like. Make a list of stuff that you would like, and make a list of the plants that you'd like as well. And then you can add those to the plan. So you start to get the different elements, the features and the plants onto the plan. And then finally you place the elements thoughtfully. You think about where the different parts can go on the plan. So outlining the plan, outline plan. So you can either use paper or CAD, which is computer aided design. I use a bit of software called QCAD, which is actually really, really cool. it's a bit geeky. It's kind of a bit more than you need if you're doing your own plan. I'd kind of recommend people use a piece of paper. I use like 5mm paper to measure stuff out on. To be honest, I do all my work now is in CAD, and I'll use the grid paper just to kind of sketch stuff out or to make measurements on, and then transfer it onto CAD. But if you're doing your own garden design, use 5mm grid paper. A3 5mm grid paper, I think is about £5-6 or something. That's what I would use. And then the tricky thing is getting the units right. It's just getting the scale right, so that, you know, 1 5mm square equals how many meters. Yep. So that's the tricky part. That's another workshop for another day. But units is a tricky thing, or a combination. If you're doing a paper plan, then do lots of photocopying, and that will help. Once you've got the original plan, then you can make lots of scribbles. Yep. The problem with a paper plan is that if you've got one plan and you do stuff on it in pen, then it's a bit of a pain to be able to get rid of it. The lovely thing about using CAD is that it's kind of infinitely kind of flexible, but it's a bit difficult to get it in there. Okay, so survey observations. This is a website called Meteo. I think it's Meteo. Really, really interesting. So the aspect in the example that I'm using here, it's a west-facing garden. So I'll do it with a cursor. West is this side. Oh, hold on. Yep, south, north, south, east. Yep. West is this side, so it gets the afternoon sun from over here. And it's flat, and it's 30 meters altitude, and the rainfall. And then you can work out the rainfall as well. So you can use a website like Meteo or the Met Office website to see what the rainfall is and the prevailing wind for your particular site. And then what plants are there as well. So your existing plants. Oh, crikey, sorry. So make a list of the existing plants, and in this example garden, there's a yew, an Irish yew, cherry, and a fig. The utilities, where the telephone lines are, the power lines, water pipes, sewage pipes. Trying to find out where they are and kind of work out where they're going, because you don't want to be planting trees on top of pipes or cables. And any structures there as well, so sheds, patios, that kind of thing, and fences. So what you're doing here, what I'm just going to show here is just you then use your plan and you put down those observations onto the plan. So existing trees. So here we have an existing ornamental cherry that goes onto the plan. An existing Saskatoon bush, the shed, the telephone line, and then go for your features. What do you want in your garden? So for example, here we want a greenhouse, a pond, and vegetable beds, and a shed and a table. So you work out where you get the most light for the greenhouse and the annual vegetable beds, and do you get enough light for the wildlife pond, and where's the table going to fit in, and you move things around. And then you move on to, hey, fantastic, I've got a question here from Featherlock. And then you move on to the tree and shrub, the kind of major plants that you want to put onto the plan. You work out, you create a wish list of what you want, and then you add them to the plan as well. And as you can see here, this is something I kind of cobbled together just to give you an idea. I've got raised beds here because the sun is coming from the south, rises in the east, comes around to the south here, sets in the west. This is full south here for the raised bed and the greenhouse. And you want to have them for full sun for those two, whereas the bike shed, you're not worried about how much sun they get. But then you also need to consider where the trees are going to fit in. So things you start to shift things around. Yeah. I'll just take a little break. I've got a question here from Featherlock. Oh, is the question? Or is it? No, it's a point to consider when designing. Oh yes. Another point is a very good point as well. Didn't really cover it. Another point to consider when designing is the external influence of neighbouring properties. They've got cattle and sheep in neighbouring fields. Nothing planted too near the fences, otherwise they damage the fences trying to reach the plants. And yes, chemical drift, fertilisers and pesticides, and you get a massive, and they have water, a large amount of water running down from the farm. Actually, we're in a very similar position as well. I do have another workshop which is about creating a plan rather than the design side, and I kind of cover the observations in more detail. But this really is, it really is critical. Where do you sit in the landscape? What else is going on? We've got next door farm has a what do you call it? It's a slurry tank. Actually, they're dismantling it today, but it's massive, green, stinking slurry tank. Just north of the forest garden, and they used to be organic, but they're using nitrogen for fertilizer for the grass. So yeah, we get a lot of runoff as well. So think about that when you're designing your hedges and where you're putting your hedges, and to block off or to ameliorate the conditions that you're getting. The same thing can be said if you have noisy neighbours or traffic, or a busy road, or all these different external factors and how they relate to your space. So thank you for that, Featherlock. So back to the plan. What am I doing? Oh yes, so I'm adding in different plants. So adding in the hazel, moving the beds around, and then adding in the apple and the crab apple, and then there's a bamboo. Where's the bamboo going? Oh, bamboo's going at the back on the northern boundary here. Yep. And you shift around the different elements so that they're all happy, and it's a balancing act. It really, really is a balancing act. So perennial veg wish list that you draw up. Meadow lawn, herbs and comfrey, and adding those. Shady perennials on the south border. Shady perennials on the south border, because the sun's coming from the south. This is a shaded area along the southern border, so that's where you put your shady perennials. Right then, so I hope that was good. I'm not terribly sure, but I hope it was useful. It is kind of a funny one. It's a bit of a tricky one trying to get the balance right, because there's so much to cover. There's a whole section, as I was saying before, I do have a workshop about creating a plan and how to create a CAD plan and how to create a paper plan and making observations. So, but the design side is really about pulling all these different parts in. So yeah, I'm not terribly sure how well that works using the example I gave, but that's the idea. You create a plan and then you pull in your observations, and pull in your wish list of stuff that you want, and then move the elements around and you play with it. So the takeaways for the workshop really are: sustainable is at the core of the design that you're doing. You're trying to make it a self-contained ecosystem that is connected to the wider landscape. So sustainable for me is the key thing about forest gardening. And make the big mistakes early. Try out position of the big mistakes are the structures and the kind of canopy layer, the bigger trees. Other things, it's easier to move them around, but the big stuff, the structures and the trees, make sure you get them in the right place. Make sure you have the right rootstock for the trees so that they grow to the right size, and make sure they're in the right position as well. And that's the stuff to concentrate on. Make the big mistakes early. And finally is begin. Really is start designing. Start designing. Just begin. You might not know, but it actually helps to get it down on paper. It helps you with the process of getting going. So just begin. Make it. start designing. So I hope that's useful. I'm going to pop outside now, and it won't be for very long actually, because I'm just going to show you the propagation area and the polytunnel area and the annual veg beds, and just where I've put them and why I've put them there, just to give you an idea. So I'm going to have a bit of a 5-minute break, and there'll be an intermission, and then here we go. I'll be using the phone outside to set up. Chat room not available. Oh dear. Okay. So I shall switch over in a second. I hope that's good. And finally, the end. There's a link of stuff here. Martin Crawford's book, Plants for the Future, RHS Plant Finder, Orange Pippin for fruit trees, and a database of insects and their food, which is lets you know why and how native plants are so cool. I shall now switch over, and yes, I shall see you outside. And the sun in my face. I just wanted to kind of talk about the design that I've done for the where's the camera? There it is. The design that I've done for the forest garden here, but it's more just about the overall kind of principles behind it. It's about why I chose to put things where I did. So first of all, can I swap over? Here we go. So this is a view from this is the best view in the whole of the place. This is a view of the Kerry Valley. No live feed though. Oh dear. Well, oh no, that seemed to be a thing. Okay. This is a view from the Kerry Valley. I hope this is recording, because I had real problems with this last week. If it doesn't record, I will come out and I will do another recording of it, just like a quick 5-minute, 10-minute recording. God, who'd work with live streaming? So let's pretend like it is working and that it is being recorded. This is south, so south is kind of like that way, and so south facing garden. Sunsets over there, that's the west, and that is east, and then that's the neighbour's field up there with the massive, you can just about see the great big slurry tank which is coming down today, and a couple of really big oak and sycamore and ash and oak up this end. Now the rest of the garden, it's about an acre, and the garden extends over that way. The idea is that the house is just down there. The idea is to have the polytunnel, and the annual veg beds, which are over there and there, in the sun, but and close to the house. Yep. So the best place for that, I think, is where we've put them. It is quite steeply sloped. This is a little kind of fruit bed with raspberries and blueberries and blackcurrants and an apple, and a ground cover of strawberry and ground ivy. So here there's a big old polytunnel as well, which is actually fantastic. Just trying to start using it. We went for the biggest polytunnel that we could afford at the time. Because south is over this direction, west is over here, with it gets shaded by this fence. So this spot here for the polytunnel was the best spot, just in terms of it gets most light from there, and it's also the entrance of the polytunnel is goes out to a path. We put a hole in the hedge. There's a wood pigeon. We put a hole in the hedge, and then a path through the hedge, and then we've got access to the house. And then in the more shaded part, this will be a bed for hostas and shade-loving perennial vegetables down here, but it's a kind of temporary propagation area, stuff in pots, a leaf mould bay, and these are kind of permanent propagation beds down here, and another one down there. And the idea for this is that these will be providing plants for their other forest gardens, you know, and the other areas gradually, bit by bit. So it's always a good idea to start off your propagation beds. And again, pretty good sun, but they get the shade in the afternoon from the kind of blackthorn and hawthorn hedge there. So it's a bit more shady. So we didn't want to have the polytunnel right the way up here. And then compost bays, because I started off doing annual vegetables. Well, still doing annual vegetables, but big compost bays here as well. So kind of at the centre of it. And then let's go show around the annual vegetable area. So there's a wildlife pond here, and those are the annual vegetable beds. So again, pretty much full sun all day. So this is the sunniest spot in the whole of the garden. On the south border there you can see there's a lot of ash, an oak and a sycamore, I think, up that there, and a hawthorn up that end. So there's a bit of shade down further down the garden, but this bit is where it gets the most sun. And we put the polytunnel in first, and then the raised beds, and then the compost bin. And so we're going full on for the annual vegetables this year, and then we're slowly going to start transitioning to perennial vegetables. So I've got some buckthorn plantain and some Portuguese kale and elephant garlic and potato onions here, mashua over there. So bit by bit we're going to migrate over to perennial vegetables when we can start getting the hang of them. Jerusalem artichoke just down this end, Turkish rocket over there, big clump of it. And then we've got the wildlife pond. So again, this wildlife pond, I really wanted it next to the annual vegetable area so that it's providing habitat for slugs, habitat for frogs and for toads, and there's log piles scattered around the place as well. And it's not in it's far enough away from the trees that it doesn't get so much leaf fall, so it's kind of like in full sun as well. And it's not the prettiest wildlife pond, but I love it. And up here we have this will be the perennial vegetable area here. So on the one side, so we've got a quince, snowbell tree, and a Asian pear apple tree, and there'll be perennial vegetable area here. So these are the kind of the main focus of the perennial vegetables, and combined with the annual vegetables there. So they'll need less maintenance than the annual vegetables, so they're a bit further away. We will have some perennial vegetables eventually in the annual vegetable bed. And then in this bed here, which has been totally neglected, this area here will become the kind of main fruit bearing area. This will be like for the currants and the red currants and white currants and gooseberries and the like. There are a few black currant bushes in there, but I'll move out the alliums from this area and then move them up to there. So yeah, the idea being keeping your higher maintenance stuff, polytunnel, compost, annual beds, closer to the house. So that's kind of pretty much what I wanted to show you. I hope that's useful. Well, I mean, it really is. It depends on. This is quite a lot of land. It's a big space, so it's the same principles though. Applying whatever space that you've got. Keep the stuff that is a high maintenance closer to the house, stuff that you want to use on a daily basis closer to the house, so herbs and the like. So there we go. Hope that is useful and provides some sort of insight. And yeah, I'll hopefully see you next week.